Will Italy be the next country to leave the EU or perhaps the Eurozone? We look at the new generation of popular politicians who want to make that happen. And with Italy's biggest banks facing their own crises, can Italians afford to leave? I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Hello, welcome to Insight. Today we look at the rise of anti-establishment populist politics in Italy. The Five-Star Movement is taking heart from the successes of Donald Trump in the USA and the campaign to leave the EU in the UK. They want to give Italians a referendum to decide if their country should leave the Eurozone. A stagnant economy, rampant unemployment and an inflexible electoral system that failed to turn popular support into seats in the Chamber of Deputies have all galvanised support for the movement and its leader, a well-known comedian. Insight's Ty Genwright reports.
Steeped in history, Italy has one of the most celebrated cultures in the world. But its modern economy has been underwater for some time. Growth and living standards have stood still since the turn of the millennium. Government debt is alarmingly high, and the country's banks are at risk of drowning under the weight of bad loans that are unlikely to be repaid.
Viva l'Italia, in bocca al lupo a tutti noi.
Long live Italy and good luck to all of us. The parting words of Matteo Renzi, the third Prime Minister since Italy's last general election, who staked his career on a referendum and lost. Italians rejected his plan to make the country's fragmented political system more amenable to reform. The poll was seen by many as a protest vote. The change was cosmetic. The new Prime Minister, Paolo Gentiloni, comes from the same political party, and he's pledged to keep Italy on its current path.
Is there an appetite in Italy for a change of government?
Every referendum, in a way, becomes, for at least part of the electorate, an opportunity to kick the establishment out of power.
We've got a new man in charge of effectively the same government. Will Gentiloni be able to resist the calls that there are for an election this year?
I think the plan is to first change the electoral system, because the current one is not fit for purpose. Italy still has two chambers of parliament with equal powers. Of course, the opposition parties are calling for an immediate election, but it's also true that Matteo Renzi himself, because Renzi is still the leader of the Democratic Party, which is the largest party supporting the Gentiloni government, Renzi does not have an interest in propping up this transitional government for too long. So even if the next general election is actually due in 2018, I think we are likely to see an early election at some point in 2017, probably from June onwards.
This man has most to gain from an election. The former comedian and now self-proclaimed populist leader, Beppe Grillo.
We need elections in any way possible. After winter comes spring.
He leads the Five-Star Movement, for whom a referendum on membership of the Euro is a pillar issue.
They won mayorship in Rome and in Turin last year, so I think they are definitely in for a strong showing in the next general election, whenever this election takes place. But it's of course, it's not immediately obvious if their whole electorate would be in favor of leaving the single currency.
While most of the world has rebounded from the financial crisis, Italy's economy has shrunk by a tenth over the past decade. 2 in 5 of its young people are out of work. Critics say there are too many on the government's payroll, red tape is abundant, and bribery remains a serious problem. Italy has a proud history of manufacturing and engineering, but today its factories are undercut by those in lower cost economies. Critics of the euro say the single currency is to blame.
Over the past 20, 30 years, it's been a slow decline. Most of this is attributed to the lack of structural reforms. Now, I also think it would be unfair to say that especially the past 2 or 3 governments haven't done anything at all, because we have seen reforms of the pension system, of the labour market, so there is still work that needs to be done.
Another clear and present danger are Italy's banks. They have hundreds of billions of dollars worth of bad loans that are unlikely to be repaid and need to raise cash to survive. The government has made $21 billion available as a rescue fund. But while taxpayer bailouts are always preferable to avoid, new European rules have made them strictly illegal, complicating a critical issue and fueling anti-European sentiment.
Now you have at least 2 parties which are openly opposed to membership of the single currency, openly anti-euro. So the debate in that sense has changed significantly. You see Euro exit debated on TV. So it's something that you would never have seen in Italy only 5 or 6 years ago.
There is a New Year tradition in Rome of taking a jump into the Tiber River.
It's beautiful because there is no money at stake, no politics.
But there is plenty of both at stake this year, and Italians might have to decide whether to take a leap into the unknown. Ty Genwright reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined in the studio by Josh Lowe, who reports on politics for the weekly news analysis magazine Newsweek. Josh, change in Italy seems to happen at random and repeatedly, and the country never really seems to get its act together. What do you think is the next stage in Italy's journey on change?
Well, a lot of people would like a general election this year. That would be both the Democratic Party and also the Five Star Movement, the populist party that just won the referendum. But the obstacle to that is there was a change in the electoral law, which we can maybe go into in a minute, that means that currently the way you vote people into one chamber of parliament is different to the way you vote people into the other. The president says until that's ironed out, we can't have an election. So there's probably going to be an election soon. It's quite likely it'll be this year or next year.
Can they really sort out this electoral anomaly that quickly?
Yes, but the question is how they sort it out. So the change in the law was designed to make stronger governments. It's designed to make it easier to get a majority in the deputies, which is the lower house of parliament. Now, that was all well and good at one point, but when the Five Star Movement started gaining power, people in the Democratic Party started to worry that would give them a very strong position if they did well in an election. So the question is, do you change the law to go back to the old system, which was more proportional, just gave people seats compared to how many votes they got in the lower house, or do you change the system to make the upper house the same as the current one? So that's the debate that's going on at the moment. It's a bit technical.
You throw on to that interesting sort of kindling fire the inflammatory prospect of what's been going on in the rest of Europe. I mean, in Britain, unexpectedly, the UK voted to leave Europe. Donald Trump, unexpectedly, has won in the United States. Does that momentum give hope to Five Star? Do you think that this is their year?
So if we do get to a general election, this is the question. It's 2017, who knows? At the moment, you've got Five Star and the more mainstream Democratic Party kind of roughly level pegging. Now, on the plus side for the Five Star, they've got a very charismatic leader, Beppe Grillo, the comedian. They are a populist movement, i.e. anti-establishment, without necessarily tying themselves to left or right, and they've just won a referendum. On the downside, Italy is going through some shaky times at the moment. There's a potential banking crisis. Do people want a party of sort of an untested ragtag bunch of anti-establishment invaders to be running their country in that time, or do they want a proven party?
Let's have a look at this Five Star grouping. I mean, you mentioned the charismatic leader. He is an extraordinary character, is he not?
Yes, he sort of rose to prominence firstly through comedy, then he kind of led these great kind of anti-establishment rallies. They called them V-Days. I won't give you the English name for them because I can't say it on air. No. It's quite rude. But that sort of sums him up. He sort of rode the wave, if you remember back to the Eurozone crisis, of this sense that the elites have let us down and that the people need to get in there and sort them out.
Which is a chorus we're hearing repeatedly, isn't it, at various electorates around the world. Some of their other ideas, though, direct democracy they cite, don't they, where one doesn't really belong to a party of the left and right. They're trying to break that convention, aren't they, and just say that their politicians would be free to support this cause or that cause?
The politicians are relatively free, and also as members of the movement, you can get involved in various ballots to get certain legal changes put forward. The plus side of which is that everyone feels like they're having a say. The downside of which is that Italy, which is already quite difficult to govern, already quite difficult to get laws through, if you have this sort of mad, sort of free coalition of different MPs thinking different things, would you ever get anything done?
Yes, and this one of their other creeds, if you like, is that politics should not be a career, and they try and put some cap on the amount of time you serve the country. Is that as a direct result, they think, of too many lifelong politicians in Italy?
Well, I think it's a very Southern European response to a Southern European problem, which is this idea of quite kind of clientelistic, insidery politics where people hop from job to job in government, in different institutions here and there. You see it in Italy and Greece and so on. I think it's a very smart move. It's one of their sort of more thoughtful responses to that problem. But again, it does mean that people who've accumulated lots of experience of government might get thrown out on their ear before they're able to do anything really good.
Who have they got supporting them, if we can use conventional terms? Because you'd think that with a country where growth has been negligible, practically flatlining for almost a decade, you alluded to the banking crisis. Unemployment, I think, is nationally about 11. Youth unemployment, somewhere between 40% and half. I mean, those are serious problems. Have they attracted traditional left-leaning young people to their cause?
Young people are quite strong supporters, yes. You also have, they're actually, the appeal of them is because they're so broad, sort of more or less anyone can. So in some areas you do have sort of older people who are fed up with the system, but yeah, young people are a big constituency for them, and that gives them the advantage over, say, populist parties in Britain like UKIP, where you see much, much older support. To some extent the Front National in France, though they do have a bit more young supporters. The Five Star Movement have a real sort of young protest-driven support, which can give them a lot of points.
It can't be defined, actually, in the traditional left and right model that I was trying to use, can it?
I would say no. I mean, you have heard more and more anti-immigrant opinions coming out of their leadership recently, which is interesting, and that's a shift to more like the kind of right populism.
Anti-immigrant philosophically, or because they are worried about the damage it does to the home economy and employment level?
Driven largely by the migrant crisis, where you have had lots of people coming in undocumented to Italy.
It's at the forefront of that, of course, isn't it, with people arriving daily? So.
Absolutely, and of course Italy is one of the Eurozone's weaker economies, and it's been on the forefront of the migrant crisis, so it's perhaps inevitable. So you have had a little bit of more traditional right-wing views coming in there, but mostly they are pretty broad brush, pretty across the spectrum.
And for those who study these things, you can't put a neat consonant in front of this to make a Brexit or Frexit, which France might be considering, with, I don't know how you're an IE-exit or something. Is that now a real prospect that Italy could decide, certainly to leave the Eurozone and maybe Europe altogether?
I think it's important to sort of take a deep breath. So firstly, we've got to get to the election and the Five Star would have to win it. Let's say we clear that and we do have a referendum on the euro. It would be very different to the last referendum on constitutional change that Renzi lost. There, while it was to some extent an anti-establishment vote, it was also a vote for the status quo. This would be a vote against the economic status quo in an already troubled economy, which has relatively high levels of support for the EU, actually, even though those are sinking. So I think it's certainly not a done deal, but 2 more years of difficult EU headlines, who knows?
Josh, good to talk to you. Josh Lowe, thank you. This is Insight. Coming next, the mountain of Italian debt causing headaches across Europe.